And again, if we start with our easy example in terms of, let's say we have x to the third minus 7x squared plus ax minus 56. If we have something like this, right? And I mentioned to you guys that in order for you to factor out by grouping, the first thing you need to do is you need to group them together. And looking at this item, there's nothing you can factor out, meaning between your x, not all four of your items have your x, so you cannot take out an x. And between your constant 7 and 8 do not have anything that you can have a same multiple. So once we have this, or if you look at the instruction, this is what you need to do is basically whatever the first two item is, we group them together. Whatever the second two item is, we group them together, meaning we just put them in a parenthesis. And now we ask ourselves, in the first group, we take one group and we ask ourselves, in the first group, what do they have in common? Or what can you extract out in the first group? Do you agree that in the first group, the only thing that is in common is my x? And if my x is the only thing in common, now we ask ourselves is between the x, which is the smaller of the exponent? Do you agree that the smaller of the exponent is x to the second? And if I took out x to the second, basically now all we need to do is, again, if I have x to the third and I took out two of them, x to the second, do you agree that I have one x left? And if I took out x to the x to the second, this item here I only have is the 7, right? If you were to distribute it back, if you were to distribute this item back, you don't need to, but if you were to distribute this item back, everybody see that x to the second times x to the first will give you x to the third. And x to the second times a negative 7 will give you 7x to the second, right? If you were to distribute it back, but we don't need to distribute it back. I just tell you that if you were to. And again, on the second item, do you agree that between this item here, the only thing I have in common is the multiple, which in this case, the multiple that I can go into the 8 and can go to the 56 is 8. And whatever the common multiple is, I bring it to the outside. And if I bring 8 out, do you agree that I have an x here? And 8 going to 56, basically we divide this by 8 and we divide this by 8. 8 going to 56, do you agree that we still have 7 left? And this, if you remember from yesterday, I told you at this step, ladies and gentlemen, at this particular step, the item in your parenthesis must be the same. If they are not the same, we did something wrong. It's either I give you the wrong problem, or you did something wrong in terms that you cannot factor out the correct item. So in this case, everybody see that we have x minus 7 over here. We have x minus 7 in the parenthesis and x minus 7 in the parenthesis. And if they are the same, what do we do? If you remember, if they are the same, all we need to do is bring it to the outside. Meaning I took this item out and I took this item out. Whatever they are the same, I bring to the outside. Whatever left over, I put them in another parenthesis. And this is our answer. This item right here is our answer in the sense that we have x minus 7 times x squared plus 8. And whoever say, well, Mr. Tran, is it the same if I put in this item like this? Yes, if you want to put x squared plus 8 in the front and x minus 7 in the back, is fine. It's perfectly fine. It doesn't matter. These two items, they are exactly the same, because imagine 3 times 7 is the same as 7 times 3. So the parenthesis itself doesn't matter the order of the parenthesis, it matters what inside the parenthesis, okay? So So this is what we have yesterday. Now, looking at this thing here, I told you guys that we have a small obstacle that I want to go over. And what is the small obstacle that I want to go over? Let's take a look at B. And the small obstacle that we have is, let's say we have something like this. Let's say 2x to the third minus 9x squared minus 4x plus 18. Okay, so you look at this thing here, you say, well, the biggest obstacle is probably the 2 in front of x to the third, but it's not. Okay, it's not term of the number in front of the x to the third. The biggest obstacle, as you will see, or if you look at the material from yesterday, or if you look at the material that we have earlier, this is the obstacle that you will see, or that I want to show you guys, that is the middle term. The middle term up here is positive, but the middle term on the bottom, on the second item, is minus or negative. And because it's a minus or a negative, we cannot just simply put the parenthesis in the first two and the parenthesis on the second two. Okay, so if you see this thing here, this is what I tell my student is, when you write this problem, when you group this item, yes, we still group the first two items. But when you group the second two items, this is what you need to do is wherever the 4x go, meaning when you group them, you have to include a negative in the second group. You have to put the negative inside second parenthesis. So wherever that 4x go, the sign is belong to the 4x. Meaning when you group them, you have to group the negative in. And when you do this thing here, first of all, if you take a look at the first group, we can see that in the first group, similarly to the previous one, the only thing we can take out is we can only take out an x. And if we can take out an x, in this case, we only take out an x squared. And if we take out x squared, do you agree that we still have 2x minus 9, right? Because x squared, bring it to the outside, we get 3 minus x squared, or x to the third minus x squared, we still have 1x. And if I took x squared out, I still have a 9. And now this here, ladies and gentlemen, this is what you need to tell yourself. Because you include the negative, when you factor out, you need to factor out a negative. Between this number, between a -4 and a 18, what can you factor out? Well, we know that we can factor out a 2, because as long as they are even, we can take out a 2. And 2, but because we have negative here, when you factor out, you need to factor out a -2. So if you out a -2, everybody see that this is what we have. What is a negative going to a negative? A negative going to a negative will give me a positive. So in this case, a -2 going to a -4 will give me a +2. And a negative going to a positive will give me a -9. And if you look at this item here, if you look at this item here, this is what I mentioned to you guys. Inside the parenthesis, they need to be, they must be, they have to be the same. So everybody see that again. First of all, because I include a negative, just because this item is a negative, I need to include a negative in the second parenthesis. And because I include a negative in the second, when I factor out a negative so that I can change the sign. Because a negative going to a negative become a positive, and a negative going to a positive become a negative. So in this case, that's why my sign changed. Negative become positive and positive become negative, because I want to have my like term in my parenthesis to be the same. And before, if my parenthesis is the same, I can bring it to the outside in terms of this thing here, I have 2x minus 9. And what is the leftover? If I took this out, the leftover will be x squared minus 2x. And again, I know it's the first time you saw this item. Let me do one more time. Let me do another problem so that you guys can see the similarity of this item here. So bear with me here. If you guys have questions, let's do one more, and then I will take your question on this thing here. So similarly, let's take a look at C. And let's say we have 5x to the third. Let's x squared minus 20x minus 12 here. So if you look at this thing here, this is all that I want you guys to do is whatever you have, we still group them. But the only thing that we need to group in terms of this item here is because of that negative, we have to include it inside the second parenthesis. And the only reason I put the plus here is I want to tell you that it's still addition, it's not a multiplication. Okay, don't worry about that for now. Let's take a look at the first group. So in the first group, hopefully you guys see that the only thing they have in common in the first group is the x, and in this case you can take out an x squared, because between the x I took out the smallest of the exponent. Between my x to the third and x squared, I took out x squared because that's the smallest of the exponent. And now once I took that out, what do I have? I have 5x because 3 minus 2, I still have one more x. And if I took out all I have left is 3. So this is what you guys have to ask yourself is whatever I do in the second parenthesis, my result have to be 5x plus 3 in my parenthesis. So I told you guys that if we include a negative, when you factor out, the only thing we need to do is when you factor out, we need to factor out a negative. And in this case, between a 20 or negative 20 and negative 12, what can you factor out? What can you take out? Well, because I take out, or in this case, I need to take out a negative 4. Because I included, I need to take a negative 4. Why? Because negative 4 going to 20, a negative going to negative become a positive 5x. And a negative going to a negative 12, that thing will give me a positive 3. And ladies and gentlemen, this is our goal. If you mention, or if you heard me keep on mentioning, this is our goal. Whatever in your parenthesis, they need to be, have to be, must be the same. If they are not at this particular step, if they are not the same, we did something wrong, and most likely you did not factor out a negative number. Okay, and if they are the same, what do? All we need to do is bring out your parenthesis item, you take it out. The 5x plus 3, what is the leftover? For now, the leftover will be x squared minus 4. The reason why I say for now is because you have not seen the special product. There's something going on with the x squared minus 4, but for now, this is what we have. Let me erase all this item. Let me ask you guys question in terms of how to start, or what do we need to do in terms of how to factor this. Any question at all? And one thing is, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to, if you remember in the first item here, in the first problem, if you want to, you can do this. It's not wrong. If you want to keep it consistent and you say, wait a minute, Mr. Tran, can I just go ahead and include like this. If you want to, you can include it like that. Whatever the middle term is, just to be safe, include in your second parenthesis. If you include a positive, when you factor out a positive. If you include a negative, you factor out a negative. Everybody see what I'm talking about here? Let me ask you guys to plan for me. Let's say if I give you D, and let's take a look at this item. Let's say if I do 6x to the third minus 2x squared. You can take out a 2 and a 6. 6x to the third minus 2x squared minus 15x plus it's gonna be 15. Sorry, not not 15. Oh, 15 is fine. No, 15 is good. Sorry, 15 is plus 5x. Not 5x is fine. Yeah, this is good. 6x to the third minus 2x squared minus 15x plus 5. Again, if you guys stop, reminder to group the first, group the second two. So let me go with your thought process, right? If you let's hopefully I'm in your shoe right now, right? Let's say that maybe some of you guys have trouble of factoring this. So first of all, if you, again, this is the first thing we need to do is whatever the first two, we need to group them together. Whatever the second two, we need to group them together, but we also need to include the negative or include the sign. If it's negative, we include the negative. If it's not, we include the positive, right? So your thought or my thought process will, or let's say if you don't know what to do in terms of this thing here, you say, well, consistently, we can take out an x square, right? So let's take out an x square. And if you take out an x square, this is what you have is 6x minus 2, right? I know I am a student right now, and I don't know what to take out. So what can I take out? Well, I know this thing here, I can take out an x square. And now, the second one, you say, well, if I am negative, I need to take out a negative. And between a 5 and a 15, I know that I can take out a 5, right? Because there's nothing else I can take out other than a 5. Because looking at this thing here, I know that a negative would be positive 3x. And a negative 5 going to this thing will give me a negative 1. So if you look at this thing here, ladies and gentlemen, this is why I told you guys, everybody see that at this particular step, my parenthesis, at this particular step, if my parenthesis is not the same, I cannot take any parenthesis out. Everybody see that? And now, if you have this item here, how can you make this parenthesis to be the same as this parenthesis? Because there's nothing you can do, there's nothing you can fix with this parenthesis, right? Look at the first, do you agree that I can take out a 2? If you take a look at this item here, do you agree that we can take out a 2, because 2 can go into 6 and 2 can go into 2, right? And if you were to, everybody see that we have 2 x to the second power. What does 2 go into 6? 2 going to 6 will give me 3x, and 2 going to 2 to give me 1. And as you can see, magically, hopefully, right? Magically, or this is what we have, this, the item in your be the same. So in the 2, in this case, you see that we need to take out a 2x squared. And if we take out a 2x squared, everybody, we have, in this case, we have 3x minus 1 all over 2x squared minus 5. And yes, whoever wrote this item here is the same. If you have 2x squared minus 5 and then 3x minus 1. Like I say, the parenthesis does not change. If you write whichever parenthesis first or whichever parenthesis second, is the same, okay? So looking at this thing here, how to analyze, or if you stuck, what to do, right? Try another one. Let me ask you guys another one, and let's say E. And let's do ax to the third plus of x squared plus 20x, no, I don't want 20, sorry. 20 will not work. Let's do x plus 27. Yeah, it should be work. So see if you can do this one. Remember to factor out the biggest number you can factor out, Okay, factor out the greatest common factor. And again, if you guys stop, because they ask you to factor out by grouping, just group it like this, right? You don't need to remember when to include or when not to include. One group, take the second to the second group. If they have a negative, you put in negative. If they have a positive, you put in positive, because it tells you what to factor out. So hopefully you guys get a hang of this thing, right? A little bit in the sense of how to break it down. Um, you know, hopefully many of you guys say, well, we need to take out x squared, right? And also because of this item here, because of the have a common divisor, don't take out 2, because 2 is you try to aim for the biggest number. So in this case, between a c a 4, right? 4 can go in 8 and 4 can go in 12. So that is what we want to factor out. And if we factor that out, we know that 4 going to 8 is 2 times. We still have 1x left, because x to the third minus x to the second, that will give. And then 12 to give me 3, there's no more x. And that should be your goal, right? And this problem, a lot of you guys say, oh, this problem is easier than the previous one just because of the sign, right? Just because of the positive sign, that you don't need to change the sign, and that's why many of you probably saw it. And now, if you see that, can you to become 2 and 3, right? We don't want to divide by 3, because 3 does not give me 2 or 3. Hopefully you guys say that, what can we factor? Can out 9 and include the positive. This is what I mentioned, is if we include a positive, when you take out you see that 9 going to 8 2 times, and 9 going to 27 to give me 3 times. And ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you guys see that this is our goal, because whatever inside my parentheses, they are the same. And if they are the same, all I need to do is bring this item out. I took out this, whatever is, I put them in one currently, and in this case, this is what I have is 2x plus 3 times 4x squared plus 9. And again, I saw a few of you guys wrote in the chat that you have this answer. Anyway, question here in terms of or how it should look like. Any question at all? All right. If you don't have question, let's take a look at this, ladies and gentlemen. Let's take a look at this item here. So here come, and let's pause with this item. You guys can practice over the weekend for me. Let's take a look at 6.2. And ladies and gentlemen, like I mentioned, 6.2 is very important. It is extremely, extremely important because this will dictate what you do or how to do with the rest of chapter 6 and the rest of chapter 7. Okay. So now in chapter 6.2, we want to factor out a trinomial. And our trinomial is this item here. But the good thing for 6.2 is there is nothing in front of the x squared. Remember, your trinomial is x squared plus something x plus a c, okay? So for me, there are two things that you need to focus in on, ladies and gentlemen, is whenever they ask you to factor out a trinomial, this is what you want to focus in is the last term. You only look and ask, or you only ask yourself is your last term. If your last term is positive, this is what you want to follow. If your last term is negative, we will do a little bit different. Okay, so let's take a look at this thing here first. So if my item, if my C term is positive, what do you will need to do? Well, if your C term is positive, the first thing you need to do is you need to think in terms of addition. Why do I say that? Because if you think in terms of addition, you need to have a same sign in order for you to add, meaning you will have both of them will be either both positive or both of them will be both negative, okay? And once you have that, this is what we need to do is we need to find a multiple of the C term that add together to give us the middle term, the B item. Once you find a multiple, all you need to do is break it into two parentheses, because what we've been doing is we have a two parentheses, we turn the item to become a multiplication, and then fill in your X and fill in the multiple of your step 2. And like I mentioned, both of your parentheses will have a same sign. They will be both positive or both negative. So looking at this thing here, I know if you read this thing here, or if I read it to you guys, you don't see it much. But let's take a look at this problem here. Let's say if I give you this problem, x squared plus 7x plus 12. So if you look at this problem here, you can see that this is a trinomial. And looking at this trinomial, do you agree that there's nothing we can factor out individual? There's nothing I can factor out individual. Why? Because this item is an x squared, this item is x, this item doesn't have an x, right? I cannot take out an x, and I cannot take out a 7 because 7 cannot go into 12, and I cannot take out anything. So this trinomial, there's nothing I can do, right? So you will see that there is no GCF for you to take out. And we cannot factor out by grouping because previously 6.1, in order for us to group them, we need to have 4 terms. We cannot just group the first 2 and forget about the 12. So now we're in another territory, which is we factor out a trinomial the easy way. And how easy is this? This is what I want you to look at. Whatever your trinomial, the first thing you want to look at is this item. So we see that this is positive 12. And if it's a positive 12, this is what you ask yourself. Is there 2 numbers multiplied to give me 12 is the multiple of 12. Is there two numbers multiplied to give me 12 that add together to give me 7? As you can see, the multiple of 12 is 1 times 12 is 12, 2 times 6 is 12, and 3 times 4 is 12. There is no other multiple of 7. Sorry, not 7. There's no other multiple of 12 beside this 3. 1 times 12, 2 times 8, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. And if you take a look at this thing here, 1 plus 12 to give you 13, 2 plus 6 to give you 8, and 3 plus 4 to give you 7, and voila, right? We got our multiple. Our multiple is this. Our multiple is 7, meaning again, 3 times 4 to give me 12, and 3 plus 4 to give me 7. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the hardest part of this item. Because if you can find a multiple, this is all we're doing is break it into 2 parentheses. We need to have 2 parentheses. Put in your x and fill in your multiple, my 4 and my 3. Okay. And now, what are my sign? My sign is they will both have the same sign, because in order for me to add, have the same sign, and in this case, because of the 7 is positive, they will be both positive. Again, let me go back. Once we find the multiple, we know that 3 times 4 is 12, and 3 plus 4 is 7. All we need to do is break it into 2 parentheses, fill in your x, and fill in your multiple. That's all you need to do is put the x first, and whatever the multiple you find, put in the back, 1 in each of the parentheses, and fill in your sign. Whatever the sign of the middle term will be the sign of both parentheses, because 4 times 3 will give me a positive 12, a positive 4 plus a positive 3 will give me a positive 7. And that is your answer, ladies and gentlemen. There's nothing else to this. That's all that you need to do. And the hardest part is find this multiple. If you can find a multiple, all you do is you fill in your parentheses. I know it's the first time you see this. Let's take a look at another problem. Let's take a look at another problem here. Same idea go. If you look at this item here, there is nothing other than x squared minus 11x plus 30. And like I mentioned to you guys, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what is my C term? Because my C term is positive, I'm thinking in terms of addition. And if it's in terms of addition, this is what you need to ask yourself. Is there 2 multiple? If there are 2 numbers, multiply to give me 30. And if you in doubt, ladies and gentlemen, just list everything out, right? 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 5 times 6, 6 times 5. You repeat it, and if you repeat it, there's no other multiple. 4 cannot go into 30, 7 cannot go into 30, nothing else can go into 30, right? So between this number, 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, 5 and 6, between those multiple, is there 2 numbers that add together to give you 11? And hopefully you guys see that 5 and 6, right? 5 times 6 is 30. 5 plus 6 is 11. Again, find a multiple that add together to give us the middle term. And once you find that multiple, all you need to do is fill in your x and fill in your multiple. And what are the sign? In this case, what is the difference between this problem versus the prior one? The previous one, the 7 is positive, so they are both positive. In this case, the 11 is negative. And if the 11 is negative, they will be both negative. Why they are both negative? Because a negative 6 multiplied to a negative 5 to give me a positive 30. A negative times a negative will give me a positive, and a negative 6 plus a negative 5 to give me a negative 11, okay? So let's take a look at this thing here. I only have let's take a look at this thing here. I know some you guys have questions, but let's take a look at this item and then practice our way through it, right? So let's say example 2. Example 2, this is what they ask you, or this is what I have, is factor trinomial. So if you factor trinomial, let's practice this item. And let's say if I give you x squared plus 12x plus 32. Okay, so the first thing is, this is what they will tell you is factor. And you can, and trinomial, we have 1 term here and 3 term here. If we have a trinomial, there's nothing we can do in terms of grouping. Okay, so if you need to ask yourself, this is what you need to ask yourself is, what is my last term? Is it positive or negative? And in this case, everybody see that is positive. We think in terms of addition. If you think in terms of addition, this is what you need to ask yourself is there 2 numbers multiply to give me 32? Is there 2 numbers multiply but add together give me 12? And if you in doubt, just list everything out. You just take 32 times 1, or 1 times 32 is 32. You take 32 divided by 2, or in terms of this thing here, 2 times 16. 32 cannot divide by 3 evenly, right? 3 can do. 32 divided by 4, you will get 8, because 4 times 8 is 32. 32 divided by 5 will not work out. 32 divided by 6 will not work out. 32 divided by 7 will not work out. And 32 divided by 8, you get back to this item. So as you can see, once you repeat it, there's no other combination. There's only 3 combinations you have. This is the only 3 combination that multiply to give you 32. And again, the one thing I tell my student is, in table, if you timetable, this thing here will be very, very doable. If you are not good with your timetable, you just need to take your calculator and say 32 divided by 2, 32 divided by 3, and so on and so forth. And if it's a whole number, we use it. If it's not the whole number, we don't care about it. And again, the only whole number we get is we have here. This item, do you agree, is what we're looking for? We're looking for 2 numbers multiplied to give me 32, which in this case 4 times 8, and add together to give me 12. And I got that. So once we see that multiple, this is all you need to do is, ladies and gentlemen, is break it into 2 parentheses, fill in your x first, and fill in your multiple. You can put the first and the 8. And now what are my sign? My sign, they will be the same. And whatever this sign is, whatever the middle term is, will dictate the sign in my parenthesis. And this is your answer. And if you in doubt, I wasn't able to do this, but if you in doubt, ladies and gentlemen, if you in doubt, you can always check it out. How do we check this thing here? Remember, I told you guys that chapter 6 is the operation. If you distributive, do you agree that x times x will give me x squared? X times 8 to give me 8x. And if you take the 4 times x, do you agree that 4 times x to give me 4x? And 4 times 8 to give me 32. And what is the 8 and the 4 do? Well, 8 and 4, do you agree that a positive and a positive will give me 12x plus 32? magically, what do we have up here? If I erase all this red item, do you see that they give us our problem back? And that's why I mentioned to you guys that chapter 6 is the backward of chapter 5. In chapter 5, we give you this as a question, and then the chapter 6 is the answer. I'll give you, okay? So if you want to check it out, you can always distribute them out. Now, I know, it is the second thing here. Let's try another one. Let's try another one. And let's say if I have x squared, let's make it easy. X squared plus 12x plus 11, right? Why do I say make it easy? Because if you have this thing wrong, we are in a bad shape, okay? Why? Because looking at, do you item is positive? If it's positive, we think in terms of adding. If it's positive, we think in terms of adding, right? And now, is there any multiple of 11 that you know of? Well, the only multiple of 11, even me make a mistake. So do you agree that the only multiple of 11 is 1 times 11? There's no other number that multiply together that is a whole number that multiply together to give you 11. So if this is the only multiple, everybody see that always x1, vice versa, x1 and x11. What are the sign of this item here? The sign of this item will be, both of them will be positive. Why? Because 1 times 11 is 11, and 1 plus 11 is equal to 12. And again, previous problem is 12 too. And again, the previous problem is 12, right? The previous problem is 12, but because of the C term, they dictate of the different combination, right? In terms of this thing here, is not 11 and 1 because of the 32. But again, the idea that add together give you the middle term. Everybody see that? Let's try this item here. Let's try this item. Sorry about it. Let's do C. And let's say if I change it up, I say y squared minus, let's do 13y plus 30. Again, we did the 30 prior to this thing here, but don't worry. In the first step, the first item, don't worry about what the letter is, because the y is just this. Ladies and gentlemen, the y is just tell you that when you break down into two parentheses, you put in the y instead of putting an x. Okay, your goal is you need to fill in the two parentheses. We have the first parenthesis, we put in the y. We have the second parenthesis, we put in y. Now I need to know what is the multiple, what is the number that I can fit in here. So I have to think in terms of addition. And again, in terms of this addition, if you remember, this is what we have is 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, 4 cannot go into 30, 5 times, I'm just, well, since we added, if you look at this thing here, ladies and gentlemen, I make a mistake, and since we added, if this were to be the case, then we say that this will be a prime item. Okay, looking at this thing here, there is no number. Don't force yourself. Don't force yourself. There is no number that add together to give you 13. Remember, what are we thinking? We're thinking in terms of addition. And if we think in terms of addition, there is no number 130, 215, 310. Oh, there is. Sorry. I thought I make a mistake, and actually there is, right? Sorry. I want to give you 40, but then in my mind, I wrote 30, and then there is a 30. Sorry. And again, since we added, do not take 15 minus 2. Okay, we think in terms of addition, and what is the addition? As you can see, 3 and 10. Again, like I say, when I make the problem in my head, I want to write 30 because I want to use 5 and 8. But then somehow I wrote 30 and it still worked out. But anyway, since it's worked out, do you agree that this is all we have is 3 times 10 is 30, and 3 plus 10 is equal to 13. Again, it's not 15 minus 2. We haven't think in terms of any subtraction. We think in terms of addition. So that the only number we have is the 3 and the 10. And once we have this item here, what do we have? Remember what are the sign in this item? The sign in this item is, because of the middle term is negative, they will be both negative. Because if you do this thing here, a negative 3 times a negative, if you look at this thing here, y times y is y squared, right? Y times y is y squared. Negative 3 times negative will give you a positive 30. So everybody see that the first item and the last item, we check it out, right? The only thing we need to test now is, the middle item. And if you do the middle item, you can see that this is what we have is negative 3y and another negative 10y. Negative 3y and negative 10y, that will give me a, because they are the same side, we add them to give you a negative 13, and that is where your middle number come from, okay? So to go back to this item here, this is what you need to ask yourself. Again, find me a number, find me a multiple. What two number that multiply to give me the last term that add together to give me a middle term? If the middle term is positive, both of the parentheses will be positive. If the middle term is negative, both of the parentheses will be negative. Let's try one more. And let's say z squared. Let's do z squared minus, let's do 18z plus 72. So if you look at this thing here, this is probably the toughest that you will encounter. Why is tough? It's just because of the 72 is a big number, right? If you look at this thing here, the first thing you want to identify is, we want to ask ourselves, is this a positive or negative? And if it's a positive, we think in terms of adding, right? So is there two number multiplied to give me 72 that add together to give me 18, right? So, if you in doubt, and it's not wrong, it just take time. If you in doubt, just list everything that you remember or everything out. Meaning, again, take 72 divided by 1. 72 and 1 will always work, right? If you take 72 divided by 2, you will see that this will give me, right, 72 divided by 2, or 2 times 36 will give me 72. And if I take 72 divided by 3, 72 divided by 3 to give me 24. And if I take 72 divided by 4, that will give me 18. 72 cannot divide by 5. 72 divided by 6 to give me 12, right? And again, you can stop here. If you recognize something, you can stop. But if you don't, 72 cannot divide by 7. 72 divided by 8 to give you 9. So as you can see, the next number is 72 divided by 9. And if 72 divided by 9, which is repeated, and if it's a repeated, that's it. There's no other multiple in terms of this thing here. There's no other number beside this item we have. And why do I say that you recognize, hopefully you recognize that you can stop here? Because 6, what is 6 plus 12? 6 plus 12 is 18, and that's what we're looking for, right? So everybody see the process here. The process is we think in terms of addition, and then you find your multiple. Now, once you have this, all we're doing is we put the z in the first parenthesis and the z in the second parenthesis. What do? Just put the 6 here and the 12, or if you want to, you put the 12 first and the 6 second is fine. Now, what do we have? What are my sign? The only thing is we need to determine the sign. What are my sign? The sign is negative, so both of them will be negative. And ladies and gentlemen, this is our answer. All of the other thing, all of the work is just the thought and the process, right? You thinking out loud. We find a multiple that add together to give us, or multiple that add together to give us the middle term. So anyway, first of all, question with D here. Now, let's take a look at this item here. Now, we will go back to that item in a bit, but let's take a look at this item. What happened? What happened if we have a negative number? What happened if my C term is negative? As you can see, the previous 4 problem, the previous whatever problem I give you, the C term is positive. And the C term is positive, we think in terms of addition. Now, if the C term is negative, and this is what I ask you guys to remember, the C term is negative, we think in terms of subtraction or subtracting, okay? We still do the same thing as before. We still find a multiple. Our goal is still the same, is we try to find a multiple that multiply to give me the C term, but instead of adding, we have to think in terms of subtraction to give us the B term, okay? We try to find 2 numbers that multiply to give you the C item, the last item, but subtract to give you the middle item. Everything else is the same. The only thing is the last step, and I will mention that when we get there. So let's take a look at this thing here. Let's take a look at this problem. Clearly, we have a color-coded. Clearly, you see that the 26 is negative. Now, is there 2 numbers multiplied to give me 26, but subtract to give me 11? If you in doubt, you can always list them out. And this thing here, there's not that much of the list, because you have 1 times 26 is 26, and 2 times 13 is 26. There's no other number that multiply to give you 26. 3 doesn't go in 26 evenly. 4 doesn't go 26 evenly. 5 doesn't go in 26. There's no other number. And looking at this thing here, our hand is a little bit, not that much, right? And look at this item, all we ask ourselves is there 2 numbers multiplied to give me 26, but subtract to give me 11? And in this case, we can see that 13 and 2. So what do? We just fill in our parenthesis, fill in our multiple, 13 and 2. One of them in one parenthesis, the other on the other parenthesis. So the step and the process, hopefully you guys see that is similar, right? But this is the last item. If you think in terms of subtraction, when are you subtract? Reminder, in order for you to subtract, they have to have an opposite sign. Remember I mentioned earlier in chapter 2 is same sign we add, opposite side we subtract. So one of them have to be positive and one of them have to be negative. And if you remember that I say the same side we add and opposite side we subtract and kept the sign of the larger number. That is the same rule we apply here, ladies and gentlemen. Because we think in terms of subtraction, they have to be opposite sign, and the larger number will get the sign of the B term. So my B term is negative. Because my B term is negative, so the larger number will be a negative because I have to subtract and kept the sign of the larger number. Think about that. We subtract and kept the sign of the larger number. So whatever the B term is, in terms of this thing here, the B term If you look at this thing here, you see that the b term is negative 11. And because it's negative 11, the 13 have to be negative. Because again, remember, same side I add, opposite side I subtract, and when I subtract, I kept the sign of the larger number. So the larger number, if you read whatever I wrote over here, the larger number will always get the sign of the b term, and the other one will be opposite. If the 11 is positive, the 13 will be positive, and the other one will be negative. Okay, so that is the difference. Is if you think in terms of addition or you think in terms of subtraction. Remember, if you think in terms of addition, they will have the same sign. They will be both positive or they will be both negative. If you think in terms of subtraction, one of them will be positive, the other one will be negative. The larger number will get the sign of the b term. Let's try one more here. Same idea, same goal, same item. And again, clearly we see that the 45 is negative. And if 45, the last number, and that's what your focal point or focus on is the last item. If the last item is negative, we think in terms of subtraction. And if you think in terms of subtraction, this is what you have to ask yourself is there two numbers multiplied to give me 45, but subtract to give me 12. And again, if you in doubt, if you know your timetable, you probably see it right through. You probably see the answer as in 15 times 3. If you don't see your 15 times 3, list them out. It's not wrong to list every single item that you have, right? 1 times 45, 3 times 15, 5 times 9, and that's it. There's no other number that multiply together to give you 45, right? Not evenly, okay? 2 cannot go on odd number, 4 cannot go into 45, 6 cannot go 45, right? 7, 8 cannot go into it. The next number is 9. So looking at this item, everybody agree that 15 times 3 or 3 times 15 is 45, and 15 minus 3 will give me 12. Now, once we identify that, all we need to do is break it into 2 parentheses, fill in your x's, and fill in your multiple. Just like before, right? Break into 2 parentheses, fill in the x in the first item, fill in the multiple. Now, what is the middle sign? Because the middle sign is positive. Because of the middle sign is positive, everybody see that the bigger number will be positive and the other one will be opposite, which is the other one will be negative. So in terms of this thing here, this is what we have. This is what our answer, x plus 13, x minus 3. It doesn't matter if you put x minus 3 in front and x plus 13, 15 in the back. The parenthesis itself, the order of the parenthesis itself doesn't matter, but the number inside the parenthesis matter, okay? So looking at this thing here, ladies and gentlemen, question here. One thing to take away, like I mentioned, is again, ask yourself the last term. Ask yourself the C term. Is it positive? If it's positive, we think in terms of addition. If it's negative, we think in terms of subtraction. Okay. So, question here, ladies and gentlemen. Well,